What's up, millennials? Have you ever wondered how to find the short interest for companies? Today I'm going to explain to you what short interest is, how often the numbers are reported, and where you can find these numbers. So let's do it! The short interest is a percentage that consists of basically two numbers. On the one hand, you have the amount of shares that are being sold short. You probably know what that is, so that people don't expect that the price is going to go up, but they think the price is going to go down, so they short the stock. And the other number you need is the amount of shares in a company's float. As we can see over here, with regards to the float, this is the amount of shares that is available to trade or, well, to buy and sell, basically. So in total, that is the amount of outstanding shares in total minus the restricted shares. And these restricted shares are usually shares that are in lockup after an IPO or a SPAC merger, for example. So people are not able to trade these shares. But the float is the amount of shares that is able to being traded. So let's then come up with a very simple example of a company that has a float of 100 million shares, and 20 million of those 100 million shares are sold short. So that means that 20 out of 100 million are sold short, and that means that the short interest is 20%. With regards to the amount of shares being sold short, the brokerage and exchange firms that are FINRA members, these need to report these numbers, the amount of shares being sold short, twice per month. There are basically three important dates when it comes to this reporting of the amount of shares being sold short. First of all, we have the settlement date. This is the date on which the shares were sold short. So the brokerage and the exchange firms, they need to say, okay, on this date, in this case, in June, for example, they need to say, okay, on the 15th of June, this is the settlement date according to this schedule, there were X amount of shares that were being sold on my platform. So that is the settlement date. Then we have the due date, and this is basically the reporting deadline. So before the 17th of June of 2021, before 6 p.m., the companies, the brokerage and exchange firms need to say, okay, on this day, on the 15th of June, this amount of shares were being sold short. And then we have the dissemination date, which is after 4 p.m. Eastern Time. That is going to be 1 week later on the 24th of June. And this is basically the date on which the companies are going to report, are going to publish these numbers. So then you can see, for example, on the NASDAQ, how many shares were being sold short for the stocks, for the companies that are being traded on the NASDAQ. This is an example of the last publication of these numbers on the NASDAQ. So we can see that this was published on June 9th. And if we go back to the schedule, we can see that June 9th was exactly the dissemination date. So that is the date on which everything is published. And the settlement date was May 28th. So if we go back here, that is definitely correct. So the settlement date here was the 28th of May. So basically what this says is, okay, on June 9th, the NASDAQ published that the brokerage and exchange firms, they said that, okay, on May 28th, we had X amount of shares being sold short. As we have seen in the reporting schedule, the companies need to report these shares that are being sold twice per month. So I created a table of basically the websites that are used most by people who are, well, traders and investors, and I created a list of all the numbers that are available to us right now on these specific websites. So we have the NASDAQ, MarketBeat, MarketWatch, High Short Interest, Short Squeeze, FinFiz, Yahoo Finance, and Fintel. And we're just going to go through each of these options. And for these numbers, I'm going to be looking at the numbers for Workhorse, which is one of the stocks in my portfolio and currently has a very high short interest for sure. So we're going to go through all of these options. First of all, on the NASDAQ, we can see that the amount of shares that are being sold is being reported as of the settlement date here, as of the 28th of May. And we can see that there are 45.6 million shares sold short in total for Workhorse. When I wanted to create this video, I noticed that MarketBeat is basically having a server error right now, which is a little bit of a shame because this is basically my favorite website so far. You can see the short interest over time. There's a graph with the dollar volume, which indicates the amount of shares that are being sold multiplied by the price of the shares on the reporting date. And you can also see like the changes of the short interest versus the previous reporting date. So that is a little bit annoying that we can't watch that right now. But yeah, I'm going to put all of the links to these websites in the description below this video so you can check it out for yourself. MarketWatch is also a solid website. They have a short interest screener, so you can basically look at the list of the most shorted stocks, which can be very useful. And right here, if you go to the website of MarketWatch and you look for WKHS, Workhorse of course, you can see the amount or the percentage of float shorted, which is the short interest, and also the total amount of shares that are being shorted right now. iShortInterest.com is also a website where you can find a screener of the stocks that are being sold short and that have the highest short interest rate. ShortSqueeze.com is a website where you can find the Workhorse symbol, for example, and you can check out also the short interest per stock, and you can see the amount of shares being sold short. FinViz has a lot of detailed information, a lot of numbers. We can see the short interest, of course, and the amount of shares in the float, but we cannot see, as far as I can see, the amount of shares that are being sold short. On Yahoo Finance, we can see the amount of shares being sold short, just like the other websites out there, but the float here is different, so I'm not sure if this is updated correctly, and that means that the percentage, the short interest, is different here too, but it's not correct if you compare this to the other websites. And on Fintel, we can find a different ratio, which is the short volume ratio, basically the short volume versus the market volume in total. If we then go back to the table, we can see that if you look at the amount of shares being sold short, there is not a lot of difference between all of these websites, but there is a difference with regards to Fintel, of course, because they are looking at short volume instead of the amount of shares being sold short. If you look at the float, we can see that there are not a lot of differences apart from FinViz, which is a little bit lower, and Yahoo Finance, which is a little bit higher, and Fintel, of course, again, looks at the amount of market volume in total. And if you look at the short interest, the percentages are very similar for MarketBeat, MarketWatch, high short interest, short squeeze, FinViz. So you can see that these 5 are all very similar, and Yahoo Finance is a little bit lower because the amount of float is a little bit higher over there. And again, if you look at Fintel, this is a different number, so it is the short volume ratio instead of the short interest ratio. Now, if you're wondering which of these websites is the best, I don't think there's a lot of difference between, for example, MarketBeat, MarketWatch, and Short Squeeze, because here you can find all the information you want, and the numbers are not very different either. Personally, I usually use MarketBeat. Right now I don't, because according to the website, there is a server error right now. But on MarketBeat, usually you can search for the ticker, you can find the accurate numbers, and there is also more information like the changes from the previous short interest reports and also the short interest over time. So as I've mentioned, these short interest numbers are usually reported twice per month, but there are also some platforms that provide you with real-time updates. For example, Ortex, you can find over here that as soon as these stocks are borrowed in a company or as soon as these stocks are returned, they know about it, and then they publish this data throughout the day and display it in the new live short interest box. So that is Ortex, but this is a paid service. I believe you need to pay about $60 per month. There's also a similar company out there, S3 Partners. Here you can find basically, again, these real-time updates about the short interest for companies. You can request a demo, but I wasn't able to find any pricing for this one. And Fintel has also a service where you can find daily updates about the short interest. This is also paid $25 per month. So that is an explanation of the short interest and where you can find these numbers. Now, if you found this video helpful, please consider sharing this video with your friends who are also investing in the stock market. And with that being said, thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.